You are terrible at DPS. Okay, you might not actually be that bad, but if you want to hard carry yourself all the way to eternity on DPS like I did, then you need to follow these major things. And if you do, you'll be well on your way to Grandmaster, Eternity, or even one above all. So let's lock in, break it all down, but it says only 10% of you have subscribed, and I want to earn that subscription. So let me know what guides you want to see down below. I'll get right on it, and then I'll earn that sub from you, and let's get into the video. Now, the first thing that we need to talk about is perhaps the most important, the responsibilities of a DPS. Now, there are 4 major responsibilities of a DPS, and the first one is to contest angles. There are a ton of characters that threaten lethality when they have line of sight on your team. So let's take a Hawkeye, for example. If that character has line of sight on your supports, they are basically being threatened with death non-stop. This means that regardless of the DPS that you are, your job is to deny that angle. You can't allow that Hawkeye to just stand in that angle constantly firing shots. In fact, the less shots you allow that Hawkeye to have, the less likely he is going to be able to make a sustained impact. And this is the game of a DPS, constantly applying pressure to characters that are on these angles that will threaten their team, and consistently allowing their team to still perform their duties without being constantly under threat. Now, it's not just characters like Hawkeye, though. It can also be characters like a dive DPS, or like a Psylocke set up in an off angle to the side of your team. That character is obviously going to be constantly going at your teammates over and over again, so it's your job to flush them out of that area. This is where you see a Psylocke that's relatively close to your team. You go into that position, you chase her away, force her to use cooldowns, leave your team while your team can support you because you're near your team. And then eventually that Psylocke has to back up, and if they want to restage, get back to your team, they have to burst cooldowns, waste time, and in that time frame, you can go make a play yourself or your team can push in. The idea here is that you're alleviating pressure from your team, and as a DPS, it's really important that you understand that you could have great supports, you could have a great tank, but if you don't do this one job correctly, your supports are going to keep dying because they're constantly under threat, your tank is going to keep dying because their supports are constantly dying because they're constantly under threat, and you're never going to be able to do anything without your supports and tanks making space and enabling each other and you. So this is one of the most important responsibilities of a DPS. Now, the second responsibility of a DPS is to apply pressure. So what does pressure exactly do? A pressure oftentimes will force resources for one, which is in the form of healing, cooldowns, or just health of the enemy team. And it can also force positioning. So it forces people to move in a way you want to. So in a similar way that we're applying pressure to flankers and people that are on certain angles in order to flush them back to their team away from your team, you can also apply pressure to enemy supports to flush them in areas that you want to have them, or you can apply pressure to certain players like tanks or supports, forcing them to use cooldowns. So like as an example, if I'm applying damage to somebody, I'm getting them low, then the Adam Warlock uses his soul bond, I used pressure to force that ability. And that's one of the primary things that I can do is if I'm in a position that threatens lethality, threatens a lot of damage, then it's going to force these things, both positioning and resources. And there's also forced respect. This is the threat of a play. This means that simply by your position, you can force enemies to respond to you even if you're not doing anything. An example of this would be a Black Panther that's in the back line, and this means that if their supports are really far in the back line, they are afraid of you, so they might have to push up to their tank, and this puts them away from different pieces of cover, or their tank, understanding that the supports could just die without their help, and other DPS might back up and give ground, give space, so that they could potentially peel, which means that you created that just by the threat of you making a play. And sometimes that is the right thing for them to do, because if they don't respect your play, then you're going to be able to get some really easy value, and because they respected your play, they move in a way that benefits your team. Now, the third responsibility here is to secure picks. Now, picks is the first kill on either team or the first or second kill on either team. These are kills that you get that kind of break open a fight. So as simple as this is, this just means killing people. Securing picks is the thing that DPS players are most equipped for because they have really offensive tools that allow them to chase people down, do high amounts of burst damage, and kill people through healing. And this is really important because DPS are often the people that can sway the fight first in their favor in a large way through numbers advantage. And the other responsibilities here is not just creating a kill, it's also punishing low or isolated targets. So you're not always going to just be able to just kill somebody, look at someone and let them die, but if someone is low by themselves or isolated, you should look to punish that person. they're out of position, they're not with their team, they're incapable of receiving help. So that's the person that should be your primary target, and you're clearing them out and finishing them off before they can get healed up. So that's a twofold skill. Number one is identifying characters and players that are out of position and can't receive help, and two is being quick enough in your reaction time and movement in order to punish that person in time. So the faster you're identifying and capitalizing is going to allow you to be a more efficient DPS overall. It's something that you're going to learn through trial and error and understanding the idea behind punishing low threats and isolated targets. Now also, you just want to be generally generating advantage. So DPS might not always be getting the kills themselves, but they're doing something to create an opening for their team. Like, let's say you're Bucky as an example, and you pull in a Doctor Strange into your team. That Doctor Strange might not die right away, but maybe with the focus, he gets hurt really heavily, his shield gets broken, and then his supports need to chain heal him right away. In that moment, there's a lot of openings with the rest of your team. That Doctor Strange could get killed by your team, or because the Doctor Strange needs so much assistance to survive in that moment, the supports are not thinking about anything else, and there's openings for your other DPS or even your tanks to create plays. This kind of goes hand in hand with the other tip, apply pressure, because securing kills or making plays force a giant amount of pressure on your enemy team and gives them more problems to solve, which can create an opening for yours. Now, the fourth responsibility is making plays. DPS have a lot of ways to make plays, and the first and easiest one is with your ultimate. A lot of DPS have very proactive ultimates that have good and bad situations to use them in. Let's take a Psylocke ultimate, which is super powerful. There are defensive ultimates that can stop you, so either beating some supports to your ultimate and ulting and getting a double kill to clutch a fight, or baiting out an ultimate by being very aggressive on a person, baiting that ultimate out like that Luna Snow ult, and then waiting 12 seconds, ulting on top of them, killing the Luna and somebody else. That could be a way that you make a play. Understand in what situations your ultimate can get value and what things can deny it, and making a game plan to make sure that you actually have value or get advantage with your ultimate. If often your ultimates are being shut down by enemy ultimates or abilities, then you're not thinking enough before you're using them. You're using them when you have them, but there are so many abilities like Loki Totem or ultimates like Luna Snow ult that can shut down your plays, and if you don't make a game plan around them, then you're not thinking enough, you're just doing, and the only time your ultimates work is due to complete randomness and not because you drew it up. The other thing that DPS are good at is clutching. DPS oftentimes can close out a fight better than anyone else. Supports don't have as much offensive capabilities as DPS do. Tanks require constant sustain to stay alive, and DPS typically have the highest burst damage, which means that in a close fight, DPS can often clutch up an entire fight if they play it really well. As a DPS, your responsibility is to clutch up more than the other guy. If you're clutching up more than the enemy supports, then you're going to be winning more fights. The hardest part of this is being calm under pressure. A lot of people can hit their shots and their abilities when there's no pressure on them and their entire team's with them, but when you make a single mistake, you lose the fight. That's truly where you are being tested the most. An important part here is that you are generally doing more with less. As a DPS, you do not want to be someone that constantly needs pocket and attention to get anything done. The more that you can do by yourself is the better of a DPS player you'll be, especially in ranked. Now, the next category is the core mistakes of a DPS, and there is a lot of mistakes, and that's the reason that so many DPS are having trouble climbing. Now, number one is dying too much. I understand that DPS will die more than supports and tanks, but still, dying too much just means you're in less fights, you're less effective, and you are becoming the opening for a lot of teams to generate numbers advantage and win fights themselves. Now, why are you dying so much? The first one is you are at a position with no options. Oftentimes, DPSs will take a flank or they'll go in by themselves and they'll commit themselves to fights with the opponents that is not fair. So they're playing in the enemy backline. They're going to go up against two people as a single person, and their team is not there to assist them. So they're putting themselves in situations where they would have to be absolutely cracked to win them, but you need to be thinking smarter and not harder. We do not want to have to aim 10 times better than our opponents to beat them. We want to be able to play smart positions and win advantage fights over and over. Now, another reason why you're dying a lot is that you're losing isolated one-on-ones. Now, this could be for a lot of different reasons. You could be losing a one-on-one that you legitimately had an advantage in, but your mechanics are letting you fail, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But most of the time, you're going to be losing isolated one-on-ones because you are all in committing to them. So there's ways to position near place spaces and natural cover I went over in my positioning guide you can check out, where if you are fighting someone and losing, you want to give yourself options to disengage. If you're playing next to a piece of cover and you start losing a fight, you can just deny line of sight and go back to your team, and it would take your opponents to chase you down with abilities, which could be something that you could actually predict and turn the tables on. So making it so when you're winning a fight you can commit to it, but when you're losing a fight you can disengage is really vital to making it so that you're dying less overall. Another thing I like to talk about here is the idea of fighting unfair. I don't want to fight a fair one-on-one with the DPS. I want to hit them by surprise. I want to fight them when I have my team with me or someone to help me, or I want to fight them near a health pack or something that can give me some sort of environmental advantage. The idea here is that I'm taking a 1v1 with somebody, but even if I think I'm mechanically better, I can actually just win the 1v1 straight up, I'm not basing it on that, because an opponent can hit an amazing shot. And what am I going to do against someone that is really mechanically cracked? I want to play in a way that even if that player is the best player in the world, I'm still bodying them in this fight because I'm stacking so many other things in my advantage, and I give myself a lot of options in the duel, which means that I'm more likely to win, and even if I don't, I'm more likely to survive. Now, another reason that you could be dying a lot is that you're not matching your team's pace. I see this most common with dive characters like Black Panther, for instance, where you are engaging really hard in their backline at the same time that your team is walking up to choke. You are way faster than them, you are many steps ahead of them, but you are engaging when your team is not in a position to apply pressure with you. Even if your team is not playing dive themselves, you want your team to be able to capitalize on the pressure you're creating, and you want the pressure that your team is creating to help make your play work better. Like, as an example, if you are just gonna dive like a Luna, Snow, and a Mantis in the backline, both of them can pocket each other, and their team is not taking any damage, so their team could either come back and help, or if their team isn't getting any heals, it just doesn't matter. But if your team is applying pressure, and then out of nowhere, the supports feel like, hey, I need to heal my team, and I need to stop this Black Panther, now the supports either pocket each other, and their entire team gets no heals for the entire fight that you're having with them, which means that your team could get picks and then come help you or whatever, or one of the supports feels like, hey, I actually need to help my team, and they don't pocket the other support, which means you kill them, and then you kill that support that didn't actually help their teammate, and you win the fight for your team. You see how if there's pressure from some other source, it creates an absolute domino effect on every play you make, and if you're trying to make plays without the pressure of your team, there needs to be a really legitimate reason for it, like someone being completely isolated, and you think you could burst them down without them getting any help, so you can not only burst them down, but you could do it very quickly. Other than that, you should most likely be waiting for your team to apply pressure. The last concept here is not playing your effective range. Every single character in the game has a range that they are most effective in, but specifically DPS, they have ranges that they would like to play in. Hawkeye, for example, would love it if everyone is freaking super far away from him at all times, besides the tanks on the front line, so he could charge his one shot and just log people from freaking range. That being said, if you're on Bucky, if you're on Punisher, if you're on Black Panther, if you're on Psylocke, you do not want to fight him at range. If you fight him at range, you're probably going to lose. You're not threatening him nearly as much as he's threatening you, because you could hit many shots on him and do no damage, but he can hit one shot on you and win the fight. So what does that mean? This means that you don't want to consistently fight him at that range. You want to set up angles on him that are closer. You want to dive him and get all up in his face. You want to make sure that when he's far away, you're not fighting him, and you're trying to route around the map, find angles, or set up scenarios where you get to fight him in your effective range, and a range that you're actually effective against him, ideally one that he's less effective against you. Now, the same goes for the opposite. If I'm playing a character that fights from range, maybe like even a Punisher, for example, I don't really want that Black Panther to be on top of me before I do a lot of damage to him. I do have a shotgun, but you gotta understand that just because I can fight from close range doesn't mean that that Black Panther can fight from range, and I can still fight from range. So if I'm from mid to long ranges, I want to be able to shoot and do as much damage into that Panther as possible before he's actually on top of me, because that's a range he can't do anything to me in, and I can do something to him in. So the entire time, the second he flies into me, I'm typically gonna create that distance, not because I'm afraid to fight close, but because he can't do anything from far. Creating situations where your character is in their effective range and your opponent's character is not is the best way to make you more effective, them less effective, and you die less overall. Now, the second mistake that DPS players are making is not protecting their supports or their tanks. You need to be constantly identifying the threat in the enemy composition, and as a big responsibility of you, it's to deny enemy DPS plays. We talked about that previously, but as a DPS, sometimes you're the best one that can actually interrupt an enemy DPS's cycle. So as an example, let's say you're Bucky and there's a Wolverine that is constantly gripping your tanks. The tanks can't really do much about it, but you as a DPS can. You can interrupt his setups, you can deny him, flush him out of certain locations, you can scout him and find out where he's at and ping it to your team, or you can just grip him and kill him outright, protecting your tanks. So the tanks that would have just fed and died are protected because of you, and you need to understand that it's your responsibility to do this, because it doesn't matter what else you do. If you can't deny that play, your tank is going to get chucked into their team and then just die over and over again. Also, you need to understand what the enemy DPS is trying to do. So let's say it's an Iron Fist or a Black Panther. That person is really going to want to go on your backline, and it's your job to help your backline do it. A Mantis can sleep an Iron Fist or a Black Panther over and over again, but if she doesn't have the means to burst that person down, then she's just going to die, and you need to be the one to help that. This is why identifying the threats in the enemy composition is so important, because if they don't have someone that's diving my backline, I can be pretty aggressive with where I'm playing as Bucky. I could go take an aggressive off angle, I could try to get line of sight on the enemy supports and dual enemy DPS on that off angle, but if they have a Black Panther, then I should be playing with my team. I should be playing to deny. I should be playing to help my team survive. Because if we can just play together and shut down that Black Panther, they're bringing the kill to us. They're bringing the value to us. They're bringing the pick to us. And then we can walk forward. And then I can be aggressive. And then I can play aggro when my support has that pressure lifted off them. Peeling is super powerful, but if you don't identify that that's what you should be doing, and you just play the same way you always play, and not changing how you're playing, where you're positioning every single time, then you're the one messing up. On top of that, you could even do this on a dive character. Sometimes your play should be to dive the backline really aggressively, but sometimes you should be marking the enemy DPS. Like, sometimes on Psylocke, I'm going to go in the backline really hard, but sometimes I'm going to follow their Psylocke around, get them out of my backline, chase them down, try to kill them, or punish them for being aggressive. This means that Psylocke can't be on my backline, I free it up, and maybe their backline's harder to dive for one reason or another, and it would be harder for me to go into their backline and kill their backline than it would be for their Psylocke to kill mine, so I shut her down, I make it so that we have to play this cat and mouse game, but at the end of the day, I win, because my backline is more susceptible to that sort of dive. Now, the third and last mistake that DPS players are making is not using their brain. I understand that DPS is a mechanical role, and it's not easy to calm or focus on other aspects or ult track or anything like that, but it's important that you are a strategist, a thinker, as much as you are an aimer on this role in particular. You need to be trying to track ultimates, especially ultimates that can directly counter you. You don't have to track everything in the game, but if you're like a Psylocke player, for instance, you should be tracking the Luna Snow ult, and you should be tracking the Loki totem. If you don't know when these things are up, when these characters have them, then you're not doing what you can to set up your plays, because they dramatically change how you should play each engagement. Because if I'm just sitting there waiting, thinking a Luna Snow has her ult and she doesn't have it, and I'm just poking and poking and poking and poking, and then I missed my opportunity to ult and win the round for my team, then I could have carried and I didn't, and I lost a game that I could have easily won. It's also a good idea to communicate. Ask simple questions. Did they use this ult? Did they use that ult? Can we try to bait out this? These are things that are super simple, but it can really help, because oftentimes, especially the lower in elo you are, it's easy to bait out these ultimates. A little bit of pressure on that Luna Snow, she's always going to pop that ultimate. A little bit of pressure on that Loki, he's going to pop his totem. He's not thinking about the consequences of these things. So a little bit of communication and help from your team can go a long way in setting up a play that will literally just win the game on the spot. And the third part about this is that aim is not everything. Yes, mechanics are very important, and we'll talk about that in a second, but know that you want to take smart fights and smart engagements over your aim. Overemphasis on aim in a game like this can have you making mistakes that you otherwise wouldn't make, like a Punisher that just runs out in the open thinking that he can burst you down before you burst him down, but then you get heals, you ult, or you do whatever, and because he's out in the open away from cover, he lost the opportunity to run away. He denied himself his own option to get out of there, regroup with his team, and potentially win the next fight. Aim can help you execute plays better and have your plays in your head line up with what actually happens more, but it isn't going to turn a terrible play into one that wins you the game over and over again. It's just not. Now, with all that said, we're moving on to the third section, important ways to improve, and guess what? The first one is mechanically. I just went over why mechanics aren't the thing that is the most important in the world, but it's still important, and there's a lot of reasons why mechanics are important, and there's a lot of reasons why, as a DPS player, you need to perform in certain situations. So mechanics is ultimately the act of following through with a perceived plan. So when you have good mechanics, you can execute a plan in your head appropriately for whatever that advantage is. So let's say I have a certain level of mechanics on Bucky and I'm full HP. I round the corner and I see a 1 HP Namor with no squids and no freaking bubble, right? In theory, I just need to hit him once. But if I can't hit that person, even if on paper I made a really good play, I push that person, I'm in an isolated 1v1 with the person that's 1 HP and I'm full and he has no abilities, and I still lose, that's a problem. Because I set up so many unfair advantages for me, but I did not execute on that unfair advantage. It's like building a plan to do something. You set up everything so that plan succeeds, but when it comes down to it, you can't perform the easier action. So having a high level of mechanical ability is also having a high level of consistency. When in that same situations, you're guaranteed to win like a giant percentage of the time. Maybe not every single time, but 9 out of 10, you're gonna win that engagement. On top of that, exceptional mechanical ability can give you some leeway when plans don't go perfectly or your opponent's plans is being enacted on you without you having a counter plan for it. So like as an example, you get pushed by somebody and you're 1 HP, they're full, but you hit that freaking grip on them, you hit them in the head, you melee them, you hit them in the head again, and all of a sudden a fight that really on paper you should have lost, you won because your mechanics were exceptional enough to make up that difference. So not only can it make it so that your plans are more consistent, it can also make it so that opponents' plans have a margin for failure because you're mechanically just freaking insane. Now, how you practice your aim is going to be variant depending on whether you're PC, controller, what character you play. Every character is going to be different, right? Some are projectile, some are hit scan, some are going to be close range tracking like Star-Lord, or long range hit scan dinks like Hela. Everything is going to be different about these characters, so you're going to have to develop your own training regimen for each and every one of them. There's a great training practice you can do in the training room, but also just having really great comfortability with your settings, your equipment is all also important to help you develop your aim. And there are further things you can do that we're not going to talk about in this video, like targeted aim training and practice drills, but you're going to have to look up those outside of this video. I would just try to make sure that you're trying to practice the same aim of the characters that you're playing, the same types of aim. Now, it's not just your raw mechanics that are important here, it's also your consistency with certain abilities. Certain abilities require skill to hit, and being able to hit them under pressure is important. You're going to have to practice this generally over time, but I think it's important to get the hang of it. And one of the things I actually like a lot is if you go in the practice room with a duo partner and just have them apply pressure to you and you hitting hard to hit sleeps. Like if you're like a Luna player and you have a really hard trouble with Black Panther, find a Black Panther player as good as you can find, have them just dash on you over and over again in the practice room, and you have to turn on the kick and sleep it. Practice that over and over again. Get repetitions with it. This is the type of stuff that's going to make you a better player, because practicing in that isolated environment and repeating those actions over and over again can be a great thing to give you like a baseline to practice under pressure when you're actually in game. Now, I would also want to make sure that you do not develop lazy aim. This is one of the biggest things that can hold an aimer back, is they allow themselves to just kind of shoot for the sake of shooting. They're shooting in the general direction of things. They're not trying for criticals. They're not trying to hit their ability better. They're just trying to generally output damage in that direction. If you're playing a character like Winter Soldier, Hawkeye, Hela, Punisher, I want you to try to be as accurate as possible with criticals. Even if it makes your aim worse in the moment, the act of trying and really honing in and readjusting and trying to hit those criticals over and over again actually makes you a better player. It's only when we get complacent and comfortable with our aim that's when our aim starts to stagnate and suffer. So I really want to make it clear here, don't embrace lazy aim. Try harder even if it hurts your aim now, because it's going to make your aim better in the long run. The other thing that I want you to monitor is your ultimate. I know we talked about it a little bit before, but ultimates is the way that you get a lot of guaranteed impact, and you can easily look at all your ults that you use throughout a game in the VOD review system, and you can kind of identify, was this a good place to ult? How did my ult go wrong? Did I play around the abilities of the opponents? What could I learn from this and do better next time? having consistent ultimates that do get value is the best way to climb. And if you can learn the set conditions that your ultimate always works in, and you make sure not to waste ultimates ever, you're gonna win a lot more fights. And you can even use an ultimate for something like baiting out an enemy ult. That's fine, but understand what that means. Understand how you play that. Like if I'm Psylocke and I pop my ultimate and the Luna ult, I'm instantly canceling it and dashing away. I'm not just gonna sit there and let it just sit in the entire ultimate. So there are moments and times where I can adapt my play, still get more value, or just set up an easy win condition for my team. There's a lot of ways to use it, but have a plan, set up that plan, and then evaluate it afterwards in your VOD reviews, and you're gonna be much better. Speaking of VOD reviews, I want you to VOD review your deaths. If you cannot climb, you're struggling no matter what you do. It's win, loss, win, loss, win, loss. I promise you, if you go into your replays on games that were close or games that you lost, look at how you died. Look at where you died. In any situation where you were the first one to die, you need to ask yourself why. And it's not because your team didn't heal you. And it's not because your tank didn't pop off. And it's not because your other DPS didn't do this or that or whatever. It's because of you. You're the one that's out of position. You're the one that's dying. And you need to be honest and real with yourself. Why did I die here? Could I have done something that didn't get me killed here? Could I have played different to not die here? Take that and go into your next game. Like, I'm all for grinding out games and getting better that way. But some days, maybe you should just play a couple, watch a review of the fight, look at some of your deaths, figure out what you did wrong, and then go into your next game with that in mind. Working on one thing at a time. This is super important because it's as simple as this. Lower deaths and you're going to win more. That's it. You die less, you'll win more. It's pretty simple, but oftentimes at the highest elos of play, games are decided by how many mistakes you make, not the biggest plays you make. So it's more about minimizing those deaths, minimizing those mistakes, and trimming up that gameplay so you're never the liability, you're never the pick, and you're a DPS that players can rely on to not make silly errors. Now, number 4 in the important ways to improve is learning all you can. So one of the things that you need to do is try to learn each and every little thing about your character. If you're maining like 2 or 3 characters, you should learn the matchups of your character. You should learn what you counter and what counters you. What are the characters that you're most effective in? What are the characters are you least effective in? And don't just take it from your own personal experience, because maybe your mechanics are lacking. Maybe your understanding of the matchup is lacking. Maybe you're not abusing a certain aspect of a matchup, and you think a certain matchup is bad or good when it's actually the opposite if it's played appropriately. And this is really important stuff to do and learn, because then you can evolve as a player. Another thing you should think about is how to be effective against your worst matchups. Maybe you're playing a character that doesn't have a way to deal with the flyer. How are you effective? What can you do to still be impactful against that flyer? Maybe you could just be really hard on their supports, apply a lot of pressure to that support so they can't help their team. Maybe you can play this way or that way. And on top of that, maybe there's characters that you are really good at farming, and your game plan should be based on farming them over and over again. The ways that they can deny you and the ways that you can succeed. And if you can set up that succeed over and over again, you're just gonna farm these type of players of this skill level all the way up to the next rank. You get really good at doing it, you get that repetition in, boom, farm, 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 farm. Oh, you're playing that character, I'm gonna farm you. You're playing that character, I'm gonna farm you. And you just do that over and over again because you understand the matchup and you get better and better at abusing it. The third part is watch better players. Watch players that are good at the characters you want to get good at. Watch how they're playing. Come in with questions and not answers. Oftentimes, these high-ranked players are playing in a way because they know it's best. They're playing around certain things. Ask questions, monitor, look. Oftentimes, I've improved the best in games by watching someone that plays the characters I want to play, but play them at a higher level, and I try to take notes, absorb, and adopt some of their strategies into my own gameplay. Now, last up, these are the major traps to avoid on DPS that can prevent you from improving and climbing at all. So these are incredibly important, and you gotta remember these. Number 1, SVP, MVP, and stats mean absolutely nothing. I can't repeat this enough. This is so freaking important. I don't care if you lost like 5 games and you got SVP every game. I don't care if you're getting a bazillion MVPs. I don't care if you have this amount of damage or this amount of kills. It literally doesn't matter. I could probably make an entire video on this, and I probably should, but really, these stats are just completely situational. They don't tell the full story, and you could play incredibly well on a losing team and not get SVB. You could be the reason that your team won and not get MVP. You could be someone that has freaking, I don't know, 20,000 damage, and you're doing the wrong things, because If you're a character like Punisher and you're just constantly shooting the front line that's getting healed over and over and over again, yeah, you're going to have a shit ton of damage. Does that actually matter? No. Did you ever contest the Hawkeye that's constantly killing your supports that is like on the right or the left? No. And they just killed your entire team. So you could be sitting there, you could be thinking you're great because you have SVB, because you just have a bazillion damage, and the 3 kills that your team has. Did that actually matter? No. Could you have actually done something that could have created a win for your team? Yes. Did you play that game well? No. So it's important to understand that these are not the evaluation markers of you being good or bad. I want to make that clear. We talked about all your responsibilities early in the video. Those are the things that matter. Not SVB, not MVP, not stats. None of that is indicative of you playing good or bad. And to add on to this also includes things like accuracy stats, like how much headshot percentage you have. Doesn't matter, because if you're making easier shots or only taking easier shots, you're going to have a higher headshot percentage than someone that is actually hitting more shots than you and mechanically better, but they're taking harder shots, further away shots, they're trying for harder shots. So it's, once again, situational. It doesn't matter, and I think a lot of DPS players get themselves caught up in this, and it's going to hurt your development because you're going to start blaming everyone else when you're actually the one making the mistakes. Now, the second trap that a lot of DPS players fall into is they play every DPS. And I get it. You want to be the flex god. You want to be able to play Magic. You want to be able to play Spider-Man. You want to be able to play Hela and everything in between. But the problem is that you are not getting the repetitions on these characters. There's so much to learn, like where you should play on certain maps, different flank routes that you can take at certain characters, how you should play against certain characters that the enemy can play, and how you should play with certain characters on your team. There's so many different variables, so if I'm playing like 7 different DPS, I'm not exposing these DPS to enough variables to get the full picture and really master that DPS. In addition to that, mechanically, I'm not getting a lot of practice on these characters. So I'm becoming really good at playing whatever character that is needed for whatever situation, but I'm not becoming good when I'm playing those characters in that situation. Because sometimes it's not about what you pick, it's about how well you play what you play. Like, eventually what's going to happen is you're going to play the right pick in that situation, but you're not going to be good enough at that character to perform in that situation, and that is something that can happen all the time. Now here, I'm not telling you to only play one DPS. You're going to get banned eventually anyways, but I am saying try not to make your hero pool too large. I really think that any more than 4 is crazy, and really 2 to 3 is probably an optimal sweet spot in this role with one character in other roles that you can flex to when absolutely needed. Now, the last mistake that we're going to talk about, again, we mentioned it before, is just making every fight mechanical. You are not just a mechanics machine, and if you're going to dumb down this game to be a pure mechanical one, then you're going to have a lot of struggles winning in this game. Like, mechanics matter, of course, but understanding the game matters far more, and it's something that you need to combine with your mechanics to make you a better and better player that fully grasps what a hero shooter is and how you can create unfair advantages over and over again. Now, if you want to improve your game sense, I highly recommend smashing that subscribe button because we have a lot of videos coming out that's going to help you become a better player, a better thinker, better mechanically. So if you want to climb, you want to get to Grandmaster Eternity, or even one above all, then you're going to want to smash that subscribe button. But thank you so much for coming by. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.